you know, there's always that moment where you get somebody who says, well, I don't even know what to say, and I don't know what's okay or not and what's not okay. And a good chunk of the time they are not saying that in good faith. So let's just kind of keep that a buck. Um, but there are times where people really just don't have the language, and language moves so fast. And how we think about and kind of talk about discourse, and how we're all kind of processing things, especially in the past couple of years, has altered so much that I could fully understand folks feeling a little left behind. And
Yeah.
so while I am always willing to look to parse out if somebody is actually doing this in good faith or not, I also want to feel like I want to give more empathy to those who are like, no, really, I just don't know what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Um, and so sometimes folks who are in that second group can stumble, and then, they're not given grace to fix what they broke. So,
Hmm.
yeah, so some of those things I think I want to talk about today, also just to kind of think a little bit more about empathy and grace that way. And then also, um, how to parse out if somebody is really in that boat or if somebody is just being a jerk.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And I'm
Um,
working very hard to stay PC. For those who know me and those who have worked with me, um, I love the way that certain words sound that are not. I like cursing and I like how it sounds. So yeah, I'm trying to keep it down for today though.
I haven't really looked at the rules for LinkedIn, but I know YouTube's a little more forgiving.
Just to be on the
Um,
safe side.
yeah, yeah. Um, to to start off, I actually want. I think that's a good place to start is language, especially because I just came out of a workshop, and one thing that I've noticed that is has been consistently helpful is level setting with people on shared definitions before I start engaging in a conversation. So instead of me just walking in and be like, what does inclusion mean to you? I'm going to first share a definition of how I'm thinking about inclusion and then ask you to then react and tell me what you think it means to you. And it really does change how people move forward with the conversation when there is shared definition. Because when you leave things open to interpretation, when things are subjective, people start to just kind of argue, especially if there's no trust built, if there's no psychological safety built as well. Um, and then I think you were also kind of highlighting people that might just not be they're just not well meaning, I guess, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know that there's a lot that we all kind of bring to each of these conversations. And especially if you are a member of a marginalized or multiple marginalized community,
Hmm.
sometimes what you bring to the conversation is years and decades of people saying and doing things in frankly bad faith. And so it makes it very difficult for you to default to what is this person actually saying, and not just, why are you doing this?
Right.
And I want to be incredibly clear. Um, in my career, even not just as DEI, but in my general career as a working professional,
Hmm.
um, more time than not, there are a lot of people who are not doing things in good faith, and a lot of times you're like, that was some shady stuff that you did right there, and that's not cool. But also just kind of want to be mindful of being able to kind of again look to see when that's happening, and then when it's someone who actually really doesn't know better. But
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I think sometimes one of the other things that we were talking about is this sort of era of the weaponization of information is kind of what we'll call it. This era of fake news, if you will, and I guess I should put air quotes fake news. Um, and then because some news is fake, some isn't, right? Hey, Jules, welcome. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn. Um, but then there's also just information overload, and it's so hard to just, especially on social platforms, to sift through what's real, what's not, what's been manipulated, what is, a clip of people acting. Like people love doing skits now, and I'm always just like, is this is this contributing to society in a positive way, or are we just stirring the pot and trying to get reactions out of people and get people to argue in the comments, which I think can be really frustrating. Um, and from the side from our perspective as DEI practitioners, I think like it can be hard because sometimes that information overload or not being able to tell what's real, what's not, or what's valid or not can discredit DEI efforts. And it can make it difficult to build shared understanding or establish common ground, especially when you have a diverse group of people in a workplace. Um, I know I posted a while back, I posted a clip talking about the concept of quote unquote reverse racism. And there's been a lot of back and forth in the comments, which I'm not going to specify which ones, but you can go look if you're curious. But a lot of back and forth on what reverse racism and what racism even means. And I know a couple years ago, someone even petitioned to have a couple of the dictionary folks like Oxford and Merriam-Webster change their definitions to highlight that power is a part of racism. And so majority groups are usually leading racism. And so I think of power and privilege as part of the definition, but a lot of people do not think of it as that way. They think of racism as you just have a prejudice against another group. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's just one example. But again, because we're going back and forth over what racism is and isn't, and what reverse racism, quote unquote, is or isn't, we're stuck in this loop and just kind of walking in circles trying to talk about these terms versus really getting to the root of can we talk about and start to dismantle the inequitable systems and processes, the actions and behaviors that exclude people. From my perspective, that can be really frustrating in a lot of ways. What
Mhm.
have you seen on your end, Caren?
Um, yeah, absolutely that. And I think that what I also see that's incredibly frustrating is the systemic portions of it. Because I try not to get into arguments about things like reverse racism because again, that just quickly becomes, you know, no good Scotsman arguments and becomes very quickly ad hominem arguments. Like they like none of those arguments really are productive at any
Mm-hmm.
point in time. However, I think the undercurrent of what is happening in those arguments is really the sense of if I admit that this is a thing, then I have to admit my place within it. And if I admit my place within it, I may have to admit that I didn't get everything by working hard. And that blows up my myth of superiority.
Mm,
And
yeah.
mind you, in that statement, I didn't talk about race. I didn't talk about gender. I didn't talk about orientation. I talked about where you fit in the system. And so I think that that is why we see so many of these conversations go so left when we talk about, you know, men talking about women, white folks talking about black folks, straight folks talking about gay or non-binary folks, folks in the LGBTQ plus community is that if you sit and admit the fact that even if you are a member of a marginalized community, I'm thinking in particular about folks like Black men, if you think
Yeah.
about you're someone who's from a marginalized community and not a marginalized community, but you're talking with someone and you have to talk about the system that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
you have to admit where you fit in the system.
Right.
And it's deeply uncomfortable to reckon with the fact that maybe where I am really is a function of luck. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe where I am is a function of just kind of being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it all myself. And I may have done a lot myself, but I didn't do it all myself. And so having those conversations, like that's where I find a lot of the stickiness is in the uncomfortability of realizing you can almost see the light bulb go off. The uncomfortability of realizing, oh no, oh no, maybe I really am not superior. Maybe I
Mm.
really am not better than. And of course, no one's going to say I'm better than, because these are the same people that would say, oh, well, racism is, cross burnings and KKK or whatever. No, racism is also really thinking you're better than someone. Racism really is, you know, touching someone's hair just because you wanted to see what it felt like, their own bodily autonomy be darned. You know, racism is, you know, redlining. You know, sexism is weaponized incompetence. That's absolutely sexism because you think that you think your gender roles are accordingly and you're just better at it than I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely sexism. You know, homophobia is saying stupid things like pause or, oh, you being sus. No, no.
Yep.
So all of those things are part of all of those isms too.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are truly confronted with it and truly have that moment with it, you have to realize and you have to deal with the cognitive dissonance of, oh no,
Yeah.
that's me too.
Yep. Yep. Ooh. Spot on. Spot on. That just made me think about just like polarization and echo chambers, right? Like with social media has come algorithms, and algorithms have increasingly isolated our ways of thinking and have become echo chambers. So the algorithms are following what you've looked at, and they're just feeding you more of that to validate what you already believe. Confirmation bias is just over and over and over without introducing new ideas or new perspectives. Um, and so, one of the things I often urge people to do at this point is be intentional, like take a step back and consider what you're looking at as social. In most instances, most of us are not going to just give up social forever. You might take some breaks here and there, but you come back and the same algorithm is there. So, but you can be intentional about following new or different perspectives. Um, I I go and I follow things, and you look at my feed or like my For You page, and it's all over the map. Like you probably have no idea whose profile it is, because I will like, follow, share things that are just all over the place. And I do it intentionally so that I even see things that make my skin crawl sometimes. And I'm like, oh, why would someone think like that? But I need to be aware of the way that people are thinking in a variety of ways. The other thing that comes to mind is the fact that there are, a lot of people are not aware of this, troll farms. So people are paid, and it's part of cyber warfare tactics. People are paid to put, um, thoughts, beliefs, ideas out there that are designed to weaponize people against each other,
Mm-hmm.
that are intended to inflict harm. And so that is a very real thing, where internet trolls are paid to spread whatever it might be. They might be paid to harass people, to say provocative things, to say things that incite conflict and disagreement. So important to be aware of that. And again, in our world where there's so much information, how do we even decipher who's just someone who's disgruntled and upset versus a troll who's been paid to come say these things online?
Mm-hmm. Well,
It's a lot to
and
process.
right. Well, and so and kind of along with those troll farms, I was reading an article that in addition to the troll farms, that there's a lot of algorithmic change to move people into recruiting. So if you see all of the troll farms and you see, you know, folks saying, you know, this is fake news or this is a, you know, not right or whatever, and then they
Hmm.
start to feed in other facts that are skewed or that are partial truths or that are revisionist history. There are tons of farms and there are people who are making tons of money off of muddying the pot. And I think that as we talk about things in the DEI space, we know that we're always talking about people. And again, always being fully aware that everybody comes to every situation with all the stuff they bring with them. And so know that all the stuff they bring with them is that they may have their, you know, homophobic uncle that they talk to a couple times a year and they're quiet and try to play nice. And after a while, they think that maybe that homophobic uncle isn't completely wrong. And then they
Mm,
start listening to other stuff and they're like, well, maybe so. And then, you know, 6 months down the road, now they're starting to spout out things that are awful and hateful.
right.
And it just kind of trickles through. And so I think that it's important, not just as DEI practitioners, but as we talk with and build strategy with audiences and other organizations, that a part of DEI work is to be able to vet critical sources
Mm,
and to be
mhm,
able to vet who's saying that and what do they benefit in saying that. Like, like we know the whole thing about the rise of even talking about CRT, which we all know CRT was taught in law school and didn't have anything to do with anything K through 12 or even college.
mhm.
And yet, because a very specific and targeted group wanted to do something to shake up and scare people, they took this very small thing and made it like a boogeyman. And now it has become itself its own language of, I don't want anything to change and I'm scared of what's happening. Same thing with the word woke, same thing with all of these things. And so when you start to hear these things as a DEI professional, or even as you're working with other DEI folks, or even as you're in sessions with folks,
Yeah.
and you start to hear these things, it then becomes incumbent on you to start to ask, where are you getting this information? How are
Mhm.
you vetting these sources? Because you can't speak the same language. You can't truly get to the sense of having a productive conversation if you're having conversations from places of a false start,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that really ties into the just emotional intensity of all of this, right? Um, a lot of discussions around DEI, um, or just around people, discussions about people often touch on people's personal experiences, their identities, systemic issues. And because people are so inherently tied to that, the discussions can become emotionally charged, right? Um,
Mhm.
which creates this defensive state in a lot of situations. And the trolls are targeting that. That's how they're so successful. They know that. They know that you're going to get emotionally riled up and it's going to trigger something in you to react. And so I think for us in the DEI space, we have to be more mindful of that than ever, especially knowing that people are often defensive. I do think there is one benefit, at least for us as consultants, to come in, and this is one of the strategies that I think we wanted to touch on today, to have third party facilitators come in, right?
Mhm.
To have an external thought partner that can come in with a new perspective, that can be objective, that can help steer conversations in a productive direction, like people that are skilled in conflict resolution and that understand how people think and process and how empathy works. I think is so, so important. um, I'm actually in the process of exploring some conflict resolution certificates right now because I was like, I want to look at more frameworks. I've read books, I've
Mhm.
watched some videos, but I want to be able to be in a setting where I can practice some real
Mhm.
frameworks. And it's really interesting because there are techniques that you can use to get people to open up, to be more empathetic, to consider new perspectives, right? Psychological
Mhm.
safety isn't about, I'm trying to convince you, I want us to all come to a consensus or agreement. It's just that you are going to allow yourself to be open enough to understand and listen to another person's perspective, whether or not you believe it or want to believe it. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think
Yeah,
once
I
you,
think
no, go
I,
for it.
I was saying, like, even like one, like the first thing I did as I was even preparing to open the consultancy, one of the first
Hmm.
thing I did was get trained on mediation.
Hmm. Hmm.
That was the first thing I did,
Yep.
because I knew that when having these discussions, I also knew, especially in 2020, a lot of people wanted to talk about, social justice and
Yeah.
uh, reform and being able to come back into center with folks. And so, that was the first thing I got trained on, was mediation. It's just, how exactly do you bring people back into a state of resolution?
Yeah.
Um, and what does that look like if you really can't? Because the answer is, sometimes you just can't.
You can.
But I would strongly recommend that anybody who is seeking to do any work in DEI, and whether that is professionally, as a part of an ERG, as whatever, get some sort of training in conflict resolution or in mediation, just so that
Yep.
you also have additional tools in your library to be able to deal with some of these issues.
Yep.
Um, and again, to also be able to understand when people are doing this in good faith. And I'm gonna talk about that a lot here, is understanding when people are doing things in good faith and not in good faith. So
Yeah,
that's quite
definitely.
a bugaboo for me, is dealing with folks who come in and who have a chip on their shoulder and want to get their point of view across and
Hmm.
aren't really willing to listen to anybody else, and they just want to get their thing out. So
Yeah, I'll um I'll make a reminder for myself to share some of the resources that I've explored and that I've used in the past for mediation and conflict resolution. Ooh, I cannot talk. Oh my gosh. So what happens when you start your day off talking for 4 hours?
yes, 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 yes.
um, all yeah, I think that's such great advice. Other strategies, since we're already on strategies here, I think we've kind of covered some of the challenges and pain points that we've seen, given our again current socioeconomic climate. um, I think tied to the facilitation and having a mediator is making sure that you are creating a safe environment and
Mhm.
and welcoming environment, reinforcing that people should feel that they can ask questions and express themselves without retaliation, without feeling humiliated, psychological safety again, right? Um, and that can come in a variety of forms. I know a lot of times we default to DEI trainings, but it doesn't necessarily, and I prefer workshops, but I know people say DEI trainings. Um, but I think beyond workshops, there's opportunity to even provide people with one-on-one space to chat with someone like a DEI thought partner, where we do a lot of listening tours ourselves and focus groups, which can be, yes, of course, they're helpful for you to gather data and insights on people, but it's also the perfect opportunity to give people, just a safe space where they can ask questions, where they can express how they're feeling very openly without feeling like they're going to have to deal with embarrassment, repercussions, etc. So that helps a
Yeah.
lot.
I think I would even push it past a safe space into a brave space, and I know that that's
Ooh, yeah.
also one of these words. Ugh.
I know. I
Um,
know.
ugh. But I love the concept, and I think, like, I'll go on a small tangent about how I feel about words in a second. But a brave space itself, I think the difference between a brave space and a safe space is a brave space is one where you're going to be uncomfortable,
Yep.
and it's okay to be uncomfortable. And I think that the way to create that, because I'm also a tactician, so the way to create that is to be vulnerable. So
Hmm.
there are tons of times in workshops and in groups and even with one-on-one with clients where I will share something about myself
Yeah.
that, again, nothing I'm sharing is like, out of pocket or anything like that, but I'll share stuff about myself that I needed to learn, or something that I, you know, didn't have as good of a grasp on, or that I needed to go and seek help in fully understanding.
Hmm.
And, I tell folks that if I, as someone who does this professionally, still have areas and gaps where I don't fully understand,
Right.
then of course, no one's expecting you to walk into this room and get everything perfect, even someone who does this for a living.
Right. Right.
So the goal is that we're trying to get to be better than where we were when we started the day.
Exactly.
So I think framing it that way gives people the psychological safety to be able to stumble. And if you say that within a group, if somebody does get a little bit bristly, then
Mm.
you get to come in and go, hey, 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 remember, this is a brave space. So we're allowing people to get things wrong.
Yeah.
We're allowing people to get things wrong so that they don't get it wrong in the future. Wouldn't you want someone to get it wrong here as
Right.
opposed to getting it wrong out there? So I,
Um.
I think tactically, that is one way of creating that space and creating that psychological safety to be able to have those difficult conversations. And I think also part of that, again, I'm a tactician, is
Hmm.
giving people the space to be out of the space.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's a lot. Sometimes it's a lot. And
Yeah.
especially if it is hitting somewhere that is a wound for you, then you might need to take a second, recalibrate, and come back. So as a facilitator, make sure that folks know that right off the bat, that instead of getting into their feelings, instead of getting into a space where you're yelling or getting to a space where you might say something hurtful, take
Mhm.
that time to step out of the space. And if that means your session is over, that means your session is over. But hopefully that means that you're going to take a moment, realize what we're all trying to do, and then come back into the space.
Yeah.
And so I know, as someone who has done it and someone who has facilitated that, it is incredibly helpful to know that that is something that is an option for you.
Absolutely. I see Jules on LinkedIn added mediation training is key for these emotionally charged discussions. Absolutely. And Dr. Rowe just added, yes, I find it very beneficial for the facilitator to share their own stories and lead the conversation with curiosity as well. Yeah, definitely. And I think that ties back to our discussion last week where we talked with Chloe Fusilier. And if you didn't get a chance to check that out, please watch the replay. It was so good. But we talked about, unpacking your isms and exploring your bias and really doing self assessments and taking time to understand who you are as a DEI facilitator and practitioner. Um, because I don't know, there are so many times where, we have experiences, lived experiences ourselves. We're still human. Just because we work in this space doesn't turn that off or take that away. And so, you yourself can be triggered by different things or by people reacting in certain ways. And so it's so important that you are taking the time to sit with that and reflect on that yourself. And then, to your point, Karen, and Dr. Rowe is just making sure that you can articulate that to other people and take that space if you need it. But it can go a long way if you're sharing that up front. And I think there's also something to be said about just remaining open. I think I've encountered a lot of DEI people, folks, especially Black DEI practitioners that are like, well, I don't need to share this about myself, or I don't want people asking questions about this. And I think that can restrict how much you can get done in this space. And I think it can restrict or kind of inhibit the impact that you can have on people because it takes a level of vulnerability. It's not easy. It's emotionally taxing at times. But when you the most aha moments I have are when I share things, anecdotes and experiences that I've had, not necessarily about my identity as a Black woman, but sometimes just my about me as a human and mistakes I've made or assumptions I've made. And to your point, Karen, letting people know, yes, sure, you look at me as a DEI professional, but I'm still learning too. This is an ongoing journey. There is no destination, right? And so whenever people hear that, it more often than not is kind of like, oh, okay, and it opens up that brave space. I also cannot. I get it, but I hate that term. Like we gotta collectively, those that are tuned in, help us come up with something else other than brave space. It just feels so like, oh, I'm so brave. Um, I see. I gotta sit with that. Why don't I like the word brave? I'll deal with that later. But
I think because the word is, I think the word has been weaponized. Well, let me say, for me, the word brave space has been weaponized, and it has been, well, A, I feel like it's been weaponized, and B, I have seen it. I have seen brave spaces be wielded as weapons against other folks to make it deeply unbrave, and unsafe.
okay,
That
okay.
I have seen and have been in spaces and try to kind of pull back in on spaces where someone called it a brave space, and what that really meant is I'm now going to be brave to slap you around.
Mm,
That's where
okay.
the bravery comes in, is that you don't get to say anything. You just need to shut up and listen. I'm just going to
Mm.
talk and yell at you for X period of time. This is a brave space. I'm like,
Oh, okay.
no,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
not at all.
Yeah,
And
I've
so,
seen that.
for me, and again, more pulling your life with you. For
Mhm.
me, every time I hear a brave space, while I know what it means, I have the physical reaction of, I've just seen when people have been really ugly in these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. A few comments here. Hello, Kirsten on YouTube says, I feel like it helps make it more of a conversation. That way, people aren't taking the info as a quote unquote lecture and rather a space to lean in. Mo on the Go, also on YouTube, added, shouldn't have to be brave to have a conversation. So negative connotation, like you can't be yourself. Yeah, I hear that too. And
Yeah.
then on LinkedIn, Dr. Maya W said, absolutely, I totally advocate for creating a pause, and then coming back to the combo. It creates space for mindful speaking, mutual respect, and carves a path for shared understanding. Even if ultimately disagreement remains. Absolutely. Like we're creating a psychologically safe space. Like it's about understanding, not necessarily agreeing or coming to a consensus, which I think is so important. Um, as you were talking, I think another thing that triggers me with the word brave is in so many instances, I have heard allies refer to other allies and be like, you're so brave, you stood up. And it's like, here's your golden star. And it just,
Thanks.
it frustrates me, I guess, because it's like, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be seeking golden stars as an ally. And you shouldn't have these well, for me it's like, okay, yes, you can express emotion. Like I've seen people cry in sessions and they're like, oh my god, I did this, and people are like, oh, you're so brave for sharing. And I've just seen it in such a, and I think it's part of my own bias that I have to check as someone who has experienced exclusion in situations and felt isolated as being the only in a lot of settings, especially in team settings, where it's like I don't feel like I had the opportunity to cry or feel this way or express my emotions in the same way. So it could be a little bit of bitterness that I'm feeling. I'll continue to unpack that later. But listen, this is how you have to like really do some self-examination. Like what is it about that word that really bothers me? And I hope us doing this in real time kind of helps people think through that as well.
Mhm.
What else? I feel like we covered quite a bit. We talked about safe slash brave spaces for dialogue. We've talked about
Y'all, seriously, help us come up with another word for that. It just
right,
it
like
grinds my gears, y'all. It grinds my gears.
yeah, not feeling that one. But I am going to continue on to explore that. We talked about having, you know, a neutral third party facilitator come in with fresh perspective. We talked about ensuring that you are aligned on shared language and definitions before you attempt to have conversations, because otherwise you're just kind of opening the floodgates for conflict. We talked about your facilitator having mediation skills. On YouTube, Mo and the Ghost suggested open space.
Oh, I like that.
That's interesting. Well, I can see that open
I like
space.
I like how that feels.
This is an
Mm,
open space. Yeah, and I
I
think
like
it
that.
reinforces what you were saying, Mo and the Go, about just being yourself. Right? We're
Mhm.
just opening it up so that you can be who you are. Yeah. Okay. Open space. I
I
like
like
that.
that. I like
Um, Yeah, I think this is an important conversation, and of course, we just sort of scratched the surface today, but it was something that was top of mind for us. And
Wait,
I don't know,
did we talk about weaponizing language?
we didn't really talk about weaponizing language. We talked more so about aligning on language and whether or
Because
not
I want
people
I
are
want to talk a
honest.
little bit about
Yeah,
weaponized language, which is the
speak
other
on it.
side of
Speak on
that.
it.
Um, and I'm going to tread very carefully here
hmm
because this might be slightly controversial. I'm going to tread very carefully here.
Wait, before you get
Um,
into that really quickly, I just want to add on one more thought on the
yes.
brave safe space. A comment from Edward on LinkedIn. Edward says, I don't know if a facilitator can make a space brave, safe, or anything. I encourage participants to lean into self accountability, ask them what sort of generosity they can offer one another as humans, as opposed to relying on the space to do the work. I can
I don't
see
know if I
that.
agree with that.
That's
I don't know if I agree
interesting.
with that. I think the facilitator can set the table. I can't make anyone eat dinner, but I can set the table. And I think that that is where a facilitator can make it in open spaces by setting the table and by setting the groundwork of saying, hey, here are the parameters of how we're going to have this conversation. What you do
Yeah.
with that is what you do with it. So I think I agree, but I don't agree. So I think that, yes, everyone needs to bring their own personal accountability to it, but I absolutely think a facilitator can set up this space
Yeah.
to make it so that they can have that conversation.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a yes and situation, right? So every single conversation, I always start off with session norms or ways of working together, and I ask people to agree to them. So,
Hmm.
uh, remaining open, speaking from the I perspective, make space, take space, share space, meaning be aware of how much space you are taking up. If you're talking too much, not talking enough, and so it is reinforcing the self accountability piece. I like the your comparison of like I'm going to set the table, but it's up to you to actually come and like uh,
Right.
and work with it. So yes, okay. Dr. Maya says yes. Please do drop some knowledge on weaponizing language. Verbal violence is real. All right, Caren, aka Baldy Einstein, what you got?
All right. So yeah. So this might be slightly controversial. Um, I think a lot of people have taken the language of therapy and have taken the language of social justice and are using it to bludgeon people over the head. And I personally hate it. And I think it is a tool that is being used, especially by folks from marginalized communities, as a way of shutting down conversations and as a way of saying, if you don't agree with everything I say, whenever, how I say it, and however I move the goalposts, then
Mm,
you are wrong and you are evil and I hate you in your face.
mm,
Um, and I have a very deep problem with it. I have a very deep problem with it. And I understand that for some folks they may say that I am more milk toast than Uncle Tom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, oh yeah, I went there. I went there. However, you can't have conversations and you can't move the needle and you can't get what you want if
mm,
you're always shutting down XYZ communities saying, well, you can't talk because you're XYZ community. You don't
mm,
have anything to say because you're XYZ community. You need to just shut up and listen because you're XYZ community.
mm,
The question is, how did you get here? How did you get to where you are? Some of it may honestly and truly be ignorant. And I will give an example about talking with baby boomers who, as a whole, make my stomach hurt as a
mm,
whole. But I also realize that from the time they grew up in a society where they were given everything. They grew up in a society where unions were a thing. Grew up in a society where we still were on the gold standard. They grew up in a society where college cost $2.97 for a year and you could have a part-time job and go to school. But the way things are now, wildly different. But they're still operating under the mindset of how it was in 1977. So,
mm,
of course, that's not how they are now. So, when they say things that are frankly obnoxious and offensive, instead of jumping to the fact that it's obnoxious and offensive, you have to remind them, hey, how much was college in 1977? Oh, really? The average was $4,000 a year. The average cost of college right now is $32,000 a year. Now, what are we doing to make up that delta of college? College is now 8 times more expensive. Are our wages 8 times more expensive? Is everything else 8 times more expensive? No. So now you understand why we have the issues we're having, but you have to explain it. And what I'm seeing a lot with weaponized language is that instead of explaining it, you just say things like, okay, boomer. And all it does is just shuts down the conversation.
mm,
And now everybody's mad. Nobody wants to talk to each other. Everyone's looking at each other, well, like, well, you're racist and you're sexist and you're homophobic. That might be the case. They also just might be ignorant.
mm,
And so, how can you say you want to move the needle if you don't actually want to move the needle? And if, as another really controversial thing, this is what happens when you have just a little caffeine, but not enough. Um, just a little enough. I I sometimes wonder if folks from marginalized communities actually really want to make change,
mm,
or if they just want to yell and scream about being marginalized.
mm,
Because if you just want to yell and scream about being marginalized, then you don't care anything at all about making changes. So it's not going to matter if anybody actually listens to you,
yeah.
because that's not what you want anyway. That's not your resolution.
Hmm.
Your resolution is, I want you to feel bad. So go feel bad.
Yeah.
And so when people do, it's like, well, you've gotten what you want. So don't be mad when you're not getting progress, because that's not what you actually wanted. What you actually wanted was to make folks feel bad. And so congratulations, you've done it.
Mm. Whew.
Got a lot of feelings about weaponized language. I got a lot of feelings
A
about it.
lot of feelings. It's so funny. The first point that you made about like therapy language. I was sitting here yesterday and I really need to turn these Apple news notifications off. But apparently, there's a HuffPost article, and the lead is 6 gaslighting phrases people say to manipulate you. And it just made me think of how often I hear people misusing the term gaslighting or abuse, which to me deters from actual abuse that people have experienced. Um, and then the other thing that just came to mind is historically us trying to get as marginalized individuals trying to get other people to feel and be upset has not really led to much change. Or those sort of, as you were talking about earlier, having facilitators that come in and they're like, just shut up and listen and learn something. You're not creating a space where people can learn because people are going to be afraid to ask questions. People are going to be afraid to speak. I shared a comment with you the other day that somebody left on one of my YouTube videos. And again, take this with a grain of salt because who knows who's real or not at this point on YouTube. But the person said something to the effect of that they had DEI education, unconscious bias, one or the other education within their workplace. And for them, it just caused the white people within the workplace to just avoid black people. And I was just like, if that's true, that is so unfortunate. And I can't help but wonder what would have gone into a workshop like that that would yield that outcome. Um, and to me, and my immediate thought was like, maybe it was something like that, where it's just like, sit up and shut up and listen. Here's what we experience. This is that. You should be upset. I'm upset. That kind of thing. And again, not allowing people to ask questions. I think it's so important to create or to set the table to invite an open space that allows people then to, yes, take that self accountability to say, I've gotten this wrong or I'm not sure about this thing. Um, I remember one time I was in a coaching session with a leader and he was just like, why can't I touch black people's hair? And we had like an hour discussion about it. And by the end, he was like, oh, but he truly had no idea because beyond just seeing black people in passing or occasionally in TV shows, he had limited exposure. He didn't really know. It wasn't a thing. And so I do again think it's so important for especially those of us that are DEI practitioners and champions to remain open, to have that patience. I think by not taking the time to educate people, we're doing a disservice to the work. Now, of course, there are things that, we say, I'm not here to teach you everything. There's so much, the interweb. I mean, so much free knowledge out here. Like, so much, so
Mhm.
much. Right. But of course, there are nuanced things. And sometimes you do need a human to talk through
Well,
things and to learn more.
we always tell people, go Google it, or the internet is free. But if someone doesn't know where to look,
Or what to even Google.
or even what to look for, then they might end up on some fascist type website, and it's going to completely skew what they're looking for. And they're like, but I did what you said. You said
Hmm.
go Google. So I went to go Google. And here I am on this website now thinking that y'all are 3/5 of a human again. Like
Yeah.
I understand the, I'm not going to hold your hand through the whole process, but
Right.
at least point people in the right direction
Right. To valid
before you say go
sources,
Google.
even just to say, hey, here's a book to check out that is
Mm-hmm.
going to help them learn something, or here's a person or two to follow on this platform. It can go a
Right.
long way. So it again is setting the table. Here are some resources. These are valid. These will help hopefully give you a new perspective that you'll consider. But it's up to you to actually go read them, absorb them, come back with questions.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I know we're coming up on time. Any other thoughts about? I know you could. We need a whole other session on weaponizing language. We should probably maybe we'll do a panel on
Oh,
language,
yeah, I would love that. I would
right?
love
That
that.
could be fun.
Yeah, I'm going to keep the
Camp out.
rest of that, in the backpack. Um, but yeah, and thank y'all for letting me get a little bit of that off my chest.
Yeah.
Um, but that's someone, I mean, especially for someone who has a social science background, and especially for someone who loves linguistics and semiotics and loves kind of how we think about and talk about language.
Yeah.
Seeing that kind of heel turn has just been really upsetting for me. It's been really, really upsetting for me to see how people are doing that and shutting down conversations.
Hmm.
Um, but I think overall, I think the thing that I would say about having productive conversations is understand what your end goal is. Why are you having this conversation? Are you having it to yell at somebody? Are you having it to come to resolution? Are you having it because you want to share information? Like, what are you getting out of this? Why are you having this
Hmm.
conversation? Understand that everybody is bringing stuff to the conversation from their past, and that might be weird. And then I'm using Mo on the goes term, have an open space where everyone gets to be themselves. People have the opportunity to be wrong. People have the opportunity to figure stuff out in real time. Let that happen.
Yep.
Let that happen.
Absolutely. I think we're so. I keep coming back to this idea of us just pushing individualism onto people and removing ourselves further and further away from community. Um, and I think it's taking its toll on how we interact and have these conversations with people, especially. I can't even say post pandemic because COVID is making its rounds right now and hasn't gone anywhere. But now that we're back in, now the outside is open again, right? For most, uh, I think there's just been such a shift and such a dynamic change that combined with the fact that, as adults, a lot of us don't, especially now the outside is back open, a lot of people are still working remote or in hybrid situations. Fewer people are attending church. There's a lot of research out there about that and how that's taken away from our community engagement as well, and our ability to be exposed to diverse perspectives and experiences. I think all of those things we have to be mindful of, and we have to now find new ways. And yeah, even myself before, I was like, I don't want to sit here and talk to you about that. Like, go learn on your own. My perspective has changed because I recognize how much misinformation there is, how much information there is, whether good or bad. And also recognize just the psychology of how you can shut someone down by not embracing and engaging with them as well, and it does not actually help us get to any sort of productive change, especially when it comes to systemic oppression, which is to me the most important thing that I would love to see changed in my lifetime. I don't care. I always say, I don't care if you're racist. You as an individual, go be racist. But is the system racist? Is it sexist? Is it restricting people, preventing people from doing something? Is it enabling certain people and allowing them to get ahead, right? So, yeah, that's all I got for today. What do you want the people to know about you before we wrap up? How they can they get in touch? How can they work with you?
Yes, yes.
All that stuff.
I actually have something very, very, very exciting.
Woot woot.
Y'all, she's finally done it, y'all. 575 years later, I finally have my Manage In newsletter out. And in
Yes.
the Manage In newsletter, I talk about management tools and tips and techniques and interesting things I see around the web about becoming a manager and, frankly, how to make management suck a little less. We know that 57% of people quit their jobs because of their immediate managers, not because of their CEOs. And so sign up for the Manage In newsletter, managin.beehive.com. Sign up for the newsletter. It is going to be interesting. It comes out twice a week. And yeah, sign up for the newsletter. She finally did it, y'all. Finally.
Yes, yes, I'm so excited. Awesome. And as you know, or maybe you don't know if you're new here, DEI in 5 is also a newsletter. I am going to add Manage In to this edition that'll be coming out later today. So you can grab the link there if you didn't catch it. And yeah, what else can I tell you? Make sure you like and subscribe if you are on YouTube. I have still not been able to monetize my full videos and get paid with ads. So please help me get there, y'all. I spend a lot of time working on this content and it's all free time at the moment. And I would love to be paid and compensated for it because life is expensive. So please like, subscribe, share with people you know. And thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing y'all again here soon.